So, if I wanted to build an agent, from your perspective, what are three things I should be doing before I start building?
Yeah, good question. I think in terms of building an agent, like three things are super important. It's like, firstly, is what is the scope of the agent? I think really clearly defining what is the outcome that you are looking for the agent to actually solve for. And I think part of that question up front is this a deterministic workflow? And therefore, is an agent actually the best? And that's a question that I would encourage people to kind of ask themselves. Or is it more of like a non-deterministic workflow and therefore an agent that actually reasons is more appropriate for that? So I think clear kind of objective and scope is the first thing, tied back to kind of broader business objective. What is the process that you are trying to optimize or outcome you are trying to optimize for? Secondly is the tools. And we kind of briefly spoken on that, like what is the scope of what you want the agent to be able to do? So if the business objective is to do X, what are the tools that are required to ultimately achieve that X objective? And then the third thing, the architecture that needs to sit around it. I think there's a bunch of different capability to kind of integrate with different tools. What architecture needs to sit around it to make sure that agent has the right access, either from like a permissions perspective to data, a security perspective, like what is that overarching kind of architecture?
Give me an example, maybe of a recent agent you built for a client.
Yeah, absolutely. So one that comes to mind is we built a housing agent for one of our partner institutions that we're fortunate enough to work with. So the housing agent had kind of two key objectives in terms of one, be able to provide 24/7 support to students. So students have questions about housing all the time, regardless of business hours. So that was the first objective. The second objective was to streamline the way in which work orders and maintenance requests were identified. So essentially, that was the business objective of that agent. We then identified for that agent to achieve those objectives, we needed to give it the tools to communicate with students. So it could send emails, it could text students, it could call students, for example. We also then needed to give it the tools so it could create work orders. So when a student responds with, oh, my light is broken, for example, or the door will not shut, how does the agent actually have the ability to go in and create work orders? And then the third component, which is around the architecture or component of it, was around, okay, firstly, what data does it need access to be able to do that? But then importantly, how does it need to integrate with their existing processes in terms of when does it make the most sense to bring in a human in that process?
Mhm.
When should we be escalating? Like if the microwave is on fire, perhaps the agent should escalate to someone else to kind of look at that.
Oh, that's a really good example, by the way. And I think everyone will be able to really see and envision for themselves how that works. How do we know that something's agent worthy? That it's not just this simple automation, maybe just a pure chat. How do we know something is really agent worthy? What's the line in the sand to say if we cross this, that is worth an agent?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. And I think there's probably a couple of things that I would talk to here. The first is really around like the level of kind of decision making that is required in that process. Is it a simple kind of like deterministic workflow in terms of, okay, A happens, then B should happen, then C should happen? Or is there actually a level of reasoning that is required or would drive a better outcome? You can think about, for example, like reaching out to students, for example. You may set up kind of a deterministic reach out to them like every single Monday, for example, with a reminder. Whereas like an agent would actually then reason about that to be like, okay, like we sent Mickey like an SMS, but they didn't respond. But we called him and he did answer. So then the next time I think I'm going to call him first before I send him a text. Like there's actually some thinking going on there and the agents can actually reason based on what decision should be made in that instance is probably the first thing.
Perfect.